I told the Alpha King, my mom has the same scar. What happened next? The room went silent. Not the polite kind of silence. Not the kind that follows a prayer or a soft song. This was the kind of silence that happens when 200 werewolves hold their breath at the same time. When the air itself becomes a wall, when every instinct in the room screams that something ancient and irreversible has just been spoken out loud. I was on my knees, dirt on my palms, blood on my lip. The Alpha King stood over me like a monument carved from stone and fury, his silver scar catching the torchlight, that jagged line running from his left jaw down to his collarbone, the one every wolf in the kingdom knew and feared. He had just sentenced me to exile, and I had just said the 6 words that changed everything. My mother has the same scar. The torches flickered. Someone gasped. And the Alpha King, the most powerful, most feared, most untouchable man in all the 5 territories, went completely, terrifyingly still. His eyes dropped to mine, and for the first time since I'd been dragged into that throne hall, I wasn't afraid. I was waiting. Before we move further into this beautiful tale, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is in your part of the world. Are you hearing this under the midnight moon or in the quiet of the afternoon? Drop it in the comments. And take a quick moment to hit subscribe and like this video so we can keep bringing these worlds to life. Now let's move. Chapter 1. The Sentence. My name is Freya Vaughn, and I have spent my entire life being invisible. Not the graceful kind of invisible. Not the quiet girl who sits in the corner and reads beautiful books and gets discovered by someone wonderful. I mean the kind of invisible that comes from being unwanted. The kind that settles into your bones when you grow up knowing that your presence is at best tolerated. I was 22 years old, unmated, unranked, and standing in the throne hall of King Aldrich Cain, the most feared alpha in the history of the 5 werewolf territories, with my wrists bound behind my back and 2 royal guards holding my arms like I might bolt. I wasn't going to bolt. There was nowhere left to run. The throne hall of Crest Keep was enormous. Black stone floors polished to a mirror sheen. Ceilings so high that the torches along the upper walls looked like stars. The banners of all 5 territories hung on either side of the room. The wolf's head of Nordval, the twin moons of Ashen, the iron tree of Grey Vale, the flame of Duskmar, and the silver chain of Crestelm itself. Right at the center, 200 wolves filled the hall. Alphas, betas, ranked warriors, elders. They stood in 2 lines on either side of a long aisle that led straight to the raised throne platform at the far end. And on that platform, in a chair that looked more like a weapon than furniture, all black iron and sharp angles, sat Aldrich Cain. He was not what I expected. I don't know what I expected exactly. Something larger, maybe something more monstrous. The stories made him sound like a force of nature, a man who had ended 3 wars before his 30th birthday, who ruled 5 territories with a precision that made other alphas nervous, who hadn't taken a mate in 12 years, and showed no interest in doing so. The stories didn't mention that he was lean in the way that dangerous things are lean, economical, no wasted motion, no wasted presence. Dark hair cut close on the sides, eyes the color of iron left out in the rain, not quite gray, not quite blue, but cold and extremely alert. He wore no crown, just a dark tactical jacket, open at the collar and the scar. The scar that started just below his left ear followed the line of his jaw and disappeared beneath his collar toward his collarbone. Jagged, old, the kind of scar that comes from something that wanted to kill you and nearly succeeded. I had seen that scar described in a dozen different histories. Every wolf child in the 5 territories knew about the Alpha King's scar. It was part of his legend. I had also seen it somewhere else. But I wasn't thinking about that yet. Right now, I was thinking about staying upright. The charge against me was simple and catastrophic. Trespassing in restricted royal territory, theft of classified pack records, and the one that made the elders in the room shift uncomfortably. Unauthorized access to the bloodline archives. The bloodline archives were exactly what they sounded like. The recorded history of every wolf bloodline in all 5 territories. Births, deaths, matings, bloodline breaks, alpha successions. Secrets that families had buried for generations. I had broken into them 3 nights ago. I hadn't meant to cause a scene. I had meant to look at one record. One. My mother's. My mother, Devorn, had been sick for 2 years. Not sick the way humans get sick. We don't get humans sick. Wolves heal. We regenerate. We carry our pack bonds in our blood. And those bonds sustain us. But my mother was fading in a way that no healer could explain. And she had started saying things in her sleep, names I didn't recognize, places I'd never heard of. And once, just once, she had looked at me with eyes that were only half present and said, "You were never supposed to stay hidden this long." I didn't know what that meant. I had no idea what she meant. But I knew that the answers weren't in our small border territory home in the lower edges of Ashen. The answers, if they existed at all, were in the bloodline archives. So, I went to Crest home. I found a contact who found a contact who found me a way into the lower records hall. I spent 40 minutes with a candle and a pair of archive gloves, pulling the file marked Vaughn, Dala, Ashvin, lower territory, and then the guards found me. So here I was. The elder who read the charges had the kind of voice that made everything sound like a funeral. When he finished, he rolled up his scroll, stepped back, and the hall went quiet again in that waiting, pressurized way. Aldrich Cain hadn't moved through the entire reading of the charges. He sat with one elbow on the armrest, 2 fingers resting against his temple, watching me with that cool, iron gaze. "Do you deny the charges?" he said. His voice was low, not loud. He didn't need loud. It simply carried the way alpha voices do, threading through the air with a weight that pressed lightly against every wolf's instinct in the room. "No," I said, murmuring in the hall. "You broke into the archives knowing the consequence was exile," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes." "And you did it anyway." "Yes." He studied me for a moment. "Why?" This was the question I had prepared for. The answer I had rehearsed in the cold stone cell, where they had kept me for 2 days before this hearing. "My mother is dying," I said. "And I think the reason is in those archives. I wasn't there to steal or sell or cause damage. I just needed to see her file." Silence. "The archives are restricted for reasons that supersede personal need," one of the elders said, stepping forward. He was old, white-haired, sharp-eyed, with the kind of face that had made difficult decisions for a long time. Elder Task. I recognized him from the descriptions my contact had given me. "The Alpha King does not grant exceptions." "I know," I said. "Then you were reckless," Aldrich said. "Not cruel, just factual." "I was desperate," I said. "There's a difference." Something shifted in the room. Not much, just a degree. Like a temperature drop, so small you almost miss it. Aldrich looked at me for 3 long seconds. Then he straightened in his chair. "Exile," he said. 30 days with warning branded. Warning branded. That meant a burn mark on the wrist, a territorial marker that would tell every pack in the 5 territories that I'd been formally expelled from royal grounds. It wouldn't prevent me from living my life, but it would follow me everywhere. Every border check, every pack meeting, every mating consideration. A permanent asterisk. The guard stepped forward, and something inside me cracked open. Not fear, not despair, something older than both of those. I had spent 2 days in that cell thinking about the file I had opened. The 30 seconds I'd had before the guards burst through the door. What I had managed to see in those 30 seconds. My mother's birthplace, classified. Her bloodline origin, classified. Her previous pack affiliation, classified. And in the physical description field, added in faded ink by a hand I didn't recognize, a single line. Identifying mark, crescent scar, left jaw to collarbone. Origin unknown. The guards grabbed my arms, and the image of that scar, my mother's scar, which she had always told me came from a childhood fall, aligned itself in my mind with the scar on the face of the man who had just sentenced me. Jagged. Left jaw down to the collarbone. Identical. "Wait," I said. The word came out before I could stop it. Before I could think about what it would cost me. Before I could calculate whether saying it would make things better or worse or simply impossible. The guard stopped. Aldrich's eyes came back to me. And in front of 200 wolves in the throne hall of the most powerful alpha in the 5 territories, I said the words that had no right to exist in my mouth. "My mother has the same scar." The torches flickered. Someone gasped. And Aldrich Cain went completely, terrifyingly still. His eyes didn't leave mine. And in them, behind all that cold, careful iron, something ancient moved. Something that looked, just for a second, like it recognized me. That was the moment everything changed. But it was also the moment I realized I had just made myself either the most important person in the room or the most dangerous. Chapter 2. The girl from the border. They didn't exile me. They moved me. That distinction matters more than it sounds. Instead of the warning brand and the open road, I got a different door, a narrower one set into the stone wall behind the throne platform. The kind of door that isn't on any public map of Crest Mark. 2 guards walked me through it while the hall behind us erupted into controlled chaos. Voices rising, elders clustering, the sound of 200 wolves trying to process what had just happened without breaking royal decorum. The door led to a corridor. The corridor led to a staircase. The staircase led up. No one spoke to me. The guards weren't rough, but they weren't gentle either, just efficient, the way soldiers are when they've been given orders they don't fully understand, but aren't questioning. We came out in a round, high-ceilinged room on the keep's upper level. Stone walls, one narrow window looking out over the silver-gray valley below, a fireplace already burning, 2 chairs, and a small table between them. On the table, a jug of water and 2 cups. The guards positioned themselves outside the door, and I stood alone in the room for about 4 minutes, listening to the fire and trying to keep my hands steady. I was not keeping my hands steady. I pressed them flat against my thighs and focused on my breathing the way my mother had taught me when I was 7 years old and terrified of thunderstorms. Count to 4 going in. Count to 4 going out. The storm doesn't last forever. My mother. Thinking about her made the shaking worse, so I looked at the window instead. The valley of Crest home was beautiful in a severe, uncompromising way. Mountains at every edge, the kind that don't invite climbing. Dark pine forests running down their flanks like ink. The river that cut through the valley floor, the gray run, was barely visible from this height, just a silver thread in the fading afternoon light. I had never been to Crest home before 3 days ago. I had grown up in Ashen's lower territory, which most Creston wolves referred to as the border scrub. Not cruelly, just matter-of-factly. The way people talk about places they've never thought much about. Our pack was small. 43 wolves when I was born, 31 now. We were a border pack, which meant we handled the paperwork of territorial crossings, monitored the unmapped passages between Ashen and the dead zone to the east, and mostly kept to ourselves. Our alpha was a steady, unspectacular man named Finnick, who cared about 3 things: pack safety, border protocol, and the annual harvest festival. He was not cruel. He was not inspired. He was the kind of leader who keeps a small community alive through consistency rather than brilliance. And for most of my childhood, that was enough. My mother and I had a house at the edge of the pack settlement, small wood-framed with a garden she kept obsessively, herbs mostly, and 2 apple trees that produced small tart fruit every September. She worked as a pack healer, which was the reason I had learned to read medical texts before I could fully shift, and the reason I understood what the healers meant when they told me 8 months ago that her condition was degenerative and untreatable by conventional methods. Fading, they called it. A slow disconnection from the pack bond, like a thread being unwound from a spool. She was still present, still herself in good moments. But those moments were getting shorter and the gaps between them longer. And she had started talking in her sleep. The names she said weren't names I knew. Moran, Kale, Vessel. The word vessel especially. Repeated sometimes 3 or 4 times in a single night in a voice that sounded like grief. I had asked her about it once when she was lucid and sitting in the garden in the weak October sun. She had gone very still. Then she had said, "Some things were buried for a reason, Freya. Let them stay buried." I had let it go for 3 more months. Then I found the photograph. It was tucked into the back of an old medical reference book she kept on her bedside table. A book she'd had since before I was born. The spine cracked, and the pages soft from decades of use. I found it when I was reorganizing her room one morning while she slept. A small photograph, black and white, slightly faded at the edges. 2 women, maybe 20 years old each, standing in front of a stone archway I didn't recognize. laughing at something off camera. My mother was one of them. I knew her face at 20. I'd seen other old photographs. Young, bright, not yet carrying whatever weight had settled into her later. The other woman I had never seen before. Tall, sharp-jawed, the kind of face that photographs well because there's nothing soft or careless about it. And on her neck, just visible above her collar, a scar. Jagged, running from jaw to collarbone. On the back of the photograph in my mother's handwriting, Moran and I, Crest home. Before what? The name Moran. The same name she said in her sleep. And a scar that I now knew, standing in this round room in Crest home, keep with my heart making too much noise, was identical to the one worn by the Alpha King. The door opened. Aldrich Cain walked in alone. No guards, no advisors. He closed the door behind him and stood for a moment just inside it, studying me with that measuring iron gaze. He had his hands clasped behind his back. In the smaller space of this room, without the throne and the banners and the 200 witnesses, he seemed both less and more. Less like a monument, more like a person. A very controlled, very watchful person. Sit, he said. It wasn't a request exactly, but it wasn't a command either. I sat. He sat across from me, poured water into both cups, pushed one toward me. I didn't touch it. Tell me about your mother, he said. Just like that. No preamble, no context. I kept my voice steady. Her name is Devorn. She's 51. She lives in the lower territory of Ashen. She's been a pack healer for 30 years. She's been ill for 2 years. I paused. She has a scar from her left jaw to her collarbone. She told me it was from a fall when she was a child. Aldrich's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but I was watching for it. What made you look in the archives? He said. I told you. She's dying. And the healers can't explain why. That doesn't explain why you came to my archives specifically. I looked at him. I found a photograph, an old one. My mother with someone named Moran, taken in Crest home. I'd never heard her mention Crest home before. Never heard her mention anyone from the royal territory. And the woman in the photograph, I stopped. Had a scar, he said quietly. It wasn't a question. The fire popped outside. The wind moved through the pine trees with a sound like breathing. Who was Moran? I asked. The silence stretched long enough that I thought he wouldn't answer. He looked at the fire. For the first time, something in his face shifted. The iron held, but underneath it, something moved. Something that had been held very still for a very long time. Moran Cain, he said, was my mother. The words hit me like a physical thing. She died 18 years ago, he said. Officially. Officially. That word sat between us like a stone dropped in still water. I watched the ripples move and tried to understand the shape of what I was looking at. Officially, I repeated. He looked back at me. Her body was never recovered. Her death was declared by the council after a 6-month search. I was 16. A pause. The scar was a birthmark. Unusual. It appeared on her skin at birth. Our family's healer documented it. It is not the kind of thing that appears twice by coincidence. I thought about the photograph. The 2 laughing women in front of the stone archway. My mother knew her, I said. They were friends. Before. That's what the photograph said. Before the war, Aldrich said. And his voice, for just that moment, was not the voice of an Alpha King. It was the voice of someone much younger, standing in the aftermath of something that had never fully ended. What war? I said. He looked at me with those iron eyes, and behind them, recognition. Not of my face, but of something deeper. Something in the story we were both apparently standing inside. The one everyone agreed to forget, he said. He stood, moved to the window, and in the silver light coming in from the valley, I saw the scar on his jaw clearly for the first time. The exact shape of my mother's, the exact length. Not similar. Identical. And I began to understand that the woman I called my mother might be carrying a secret that could unmake everything I thought I knew about who I was. Chapter 3. The War They Buried. He didn't tell me everything that night. He told me enough. He told me that 15 years before I was born, there had been a conflict in the 5 territories that the official histories referred to as the Border Reformation. A diplomatic restructuring, a peaceful renegotiation of territorial lines. That's what the textbooks said. That's what the elders taught the children. That's not what happened. What happened was a war. Not the kind of war with declared sides and honorable battle lines. The other kind. The kind fought in corridors and records halls and darkened rooms. The kind where the weapons are information and bloodlines and carefully placed betrayals. A power war. The most dangerous kind. It had started, Aldrich told me, with the discovery that several high-ranking bloodlines in the 5 territories, families who had held alpha and elder positions for generations, were not what they claimed to be. The bloodline archives had been falsified, not recently, methodically, over nearly a century, by a group that operated under a name I'd never heard, the Vessel Council. He said the name quietly, the way you say something you've spent years trying not to say. I thought of my mother's sleeping voice. Vessel, vessel, vessel. I didn't speak. I let him continue. The Vessel Council, he told me, believed in something called the binding line, an old piece of wolf theology that most modern packs had dismissed as mythology. The idea that there existed somewhere in the wolf bloodlines a single unbroken line of descent from the first alpha, not the most powerful alpha, but the truest one, and that this line carried, dormant in its blood, the ability to do something that no wolf in living memory had managed. Unite the 5 territories under a single voluntary bond. Not through conquest, through resonance, through a biological and spiritual phenomenon that the old texts called the full binding. The Vessel Council wanted to control that bloodline, own it, use it as a lever. And when a family got too close to discovering what they were, when their blood started showing signs of the dormant trait, the council moved to suppress them, relocate them, sever their connections to the archives so the truth couldn't surface. My mother, Aldrich said, still facing the window, discovered what she was when she was 19. The trait manifested in her physically. He paused. The scar. The scar is the mark, I said. Not a question. Understanding was moving through me like cold water. In the oldest theology, it's called the Crest Mark. It appears on those who carry the binding line. The Vessel Council spent decades suppressing any record of it. He turned from the window. When my mother realized what she carried, she didn't go to the council. She went underground. She found others who had been suppressed. People who should have had power, should have had lineage, and had been quietly erased. She spent 3 years building a network. And I said, though I already felt the answer in the pit of my stomach, and when you were 16, the council found her. His voice was steady. The steadiness of someone who has made peace with a wound by pressing it flat and keeping it there through sheer discipline. The official story is that she died in a territorial border incident. The unofficial story is that she was taken, removed. The council needed her line, needed a descendant of the binding bloodline under their control. But she had already hidden her most important work. He looked at me with those iron-gray eyes. She had hidden her air, he said. The fire was the only sound in the room for a very long moment. I was thinking about my mother. Devorn, healer, gardener, woman of small routines and careful silences. The way she had looked at me sometimes when she didn't think I was watching with an expression I had never been able to name. Not sadness exactly. More like someone watching a clock, waiting for a moment they've been dreading. You were never supposed to stay hidden this long. You think my mother knew her? I said. I think your mother was part of her network, Aldrich said. I think your mother was one of the people she trusted. And the scar? The scar doesn't transfer by contact or by loyalty, he said. It's bloodline. It's inherited. He paused, and each word that followed landed with the weight of something that had been carefully set down rather than thrown. If your mother has the crest mark, Freya, she doesn't just know the story. I stared at him. She is the story, I said. He nodded once, and the entire shape of my life rearranged itself in the space of a breath. Every ordinary detail, the border house, the apple trees, the small pack, the careful life, suddenly looked different. Not like a simple life, like a hiding place. I stood up without meaning to, walked to the window because I needed to move, needed to put distance between myself and the understanding trying to break open in my chest. The valley below was dark now. The Grey Run River was gone, swallowed by the night. The mountains at the edges were just shapes, solid, unmovable. She never told me. I said. She wasn't supposed to. He came to stand beside me at the window. Not close, but close enough that I could feel the alpha weight of him. That low hum of power that high-ranking wolves carry the way some people carry warmth. Telling you would have meant exposing you. Everything your mother did was done to keep you off the council's map. Except she's dying, I said. The words came out sharper than I intended. Yes, she's dying, and the healers can't explain it because it's not a physical illness, is it? I turned to look at him. It's the bond. She's been severed from something. From the full extent of her bloodline. Something in his face shifted. A fractional movement that might have been surprise or might have been recognition. The Vessel Council has methods, he said carefully. Ways of suppressing the Crest Mark without removing it. They can't destroy a bloodline. It's too deeply coded. But they can create a kind of internal severance, a fracture between the wolf and the full power of their line. He paused. If they found her, if they located her at any point in the last 2 years and applied a suppression, she would fade, I said. Exactly like she's fading. The word vessel in my mother's sleeping voice. Not a reference. A name. The name of the thing that was killing her. The anger that moved through me was not hot. It was cold and structural, like iron being poured into a mold. I felt it set. Can it be reversed? I said. Possibly. He turned back to the window. But it requires access to the original binding records, the ones the council tried to destroy, the ones that document the full Crest Mark lineage. If I can prove your mother's bloodline is what I think it is, then you can challenge the suppression. I said. Then I can do more than challenge it. He said. I have been building toward a case against the Vessel Council for 8 years. Quietly, gathering evidence, placing people, waiting. He looked at me, and there was something in his face that wasn't coldness, something that had been sitting behind the iron for a long time, patient and unyielding. What you found when you broke into the archives. You were looking at your mother's file. Did you see anything before the guards reached you? Any notation? Any cross-reference? I thought back. The candle, the gloves, the file open on the table. Classified, classified, classified. And then the last notation. The one I'd read so fast I had almost dismissed it. There was a cross-reference number, I said slowly. In the physical description field below the scar notation. I closed my eyes. I had always had a strong memory, another thing my mother had quietly, consistently trained me in without explaining why. The notation read, See linked record VC register Crest Home sub-archive designation 7 Kale. The silence that followed was absolute. When I opened my eyes, Aldrich was staring at me with an expression that was the first fully unguarded thing I had seen from him. Kale, he said. That name means something to you, I said. It's my father's name, he said. The fire had burned down to embers. Outside, the wind had dropped, and between me and the most powerful alpha in 5 territories, something was forming. Not trust, not yet, but the first fragile architecture of a shared purpose. We were looking for the same thing, the same buried truth, the same missing person. We just hadn't known it until tonight. Chapter 4. What the archive hid. I didn't sleep. They gave me a room, a real one this time, not a cell. Stone walls softened by a hanging tapestry in deep blue and gray. A narrow bed with actual blankets, a wash basin, and a window with iron latticework that let in the cold mountain air and a thin slice of the pre-dawn sky. I lay on the bed fully dressed and stared at the ceiling and thought about my mother's hands. She had healer's hands. Efficient, precise. She could tell what was wrong with you by the way she pressed along the meridian points of your wrist. An old technique, pre-modern, the kind that most pack healers had replaced with clinical methods. She taught me some of it the way she taught me other things. Quietly, practically, without drama or ceremony. Here, pay attention. Now you try. I used to think it was her nature. A private person, contained, self-sufficient. Now I thought she was protecting both of us from what she knew. Every unnecessary word was a risk. Every piece of history she didn't tell me was a wall she was building between me and something that wanted to find me. And she had been so careful for so long. And something had found her anyway. I got up before dawn and washed my face in the cold basin water and stood at the latticework window and watched the sky go from black to dark blue to the pale gray that comes just before the sun commits. A knock at the door, quiet but deliberate. A woman I hadn't met stood in the doorway, tall, broad-shouldered, with a face built for severity that was currently arranged in something closer to cautious professionalism. She wore the dark tactical clothing of a royal guard, but no armor, and she held a tray with bread, dried fruit, and black tea. "The king asks that you eat," she said. "We leave in 2 hours." "Leave for where?" I said. "The sub-archive," she said, and left before I could ask anything else. I ate. The bread was dense and good, the tea hot enough to make me feel temporarily like a person again. Then I sat on the edge of the bed and thought about the sequence of last night's conversation, laying it out in my memory like objects on a table, examining each one. The vessel council, the binding line, the crest mark, my mother's scar, Aldrich's mother, Moran Cain, missing for 18 years. My mother and Moran photographed together in Crestholm before. Aldrich's father, Cale, appearing as a cross-reference in my mother's restricted file. None of it was a coincidence. I had known that from the moment I saw the scar on Aldrich's face and recognized it. But the pattern underneath was larger and older than anything I had prepared myself for. When I got on the road to Crestholm with a forged pass and a desperate plan, the question was, what exactly was I to this story? I was the daughter of a woman who carried the crest mark. That meant the bloodline ran through me too. Or might. I didn't have the scar. I checked. Many times in my life, I had run my fingers along my jaw and collarbone, half searching for something I couldn't name. Nothing. But the absence of the mark didn't mean the absence of the bloodline. That wasn't how hereditary traits worked, especially old ones. They could skip. They could lie dormant. They could wait. You were never supposed to stay hidden this long. 2 hours later, I was in a vehicle I hadn't expected. A hard-bodied, blacked-out transport built for mountain roads. Aldrich sat across from me in the dim interior. The tall guard. I had learned her name by then, Tavar. She was the head of the king's personal security, sat up front with the driver. We had 2 other vehicles flanking us. Unmarked. No royal insignia. "Does the council know about the sub-archive?" I asked as the transport wound down through the mountain roads below Crestholm Keep. "They know it exists," Aldrich said. "They don't know I've kept it active." He glanced out the narrow window. When my mother went missing, I was 16 and I had no power and no proof. But I started documenting quietly. Everything I found, every name that crossed my path, every discrepancy between the official histories and what I could actually verify. I had it coded and stored in the sub-archive off the main system. "For 8 years, I said. "For 8 years, he confirmed. "That's either very patient or very obsessive," I said. Something moved across his face. Not a smile, exactly. More like the ghost of one, passing through quickly and not staying. "My mother would have called it both," he said. We drove for another 40 minutes, descending out of the upper keep territory into the lower valley. The road narrowed. Pine trees pressed close on both sides, their roots buckled by the mountain frost. We passed no checkpoints, no border markers. Tavar navigated without a map. The sub-archive was in the basement of what looked from the outside like an old pack records hall, a stone building half buried in the hillside, its upper entrance overgrown with scrub brush. Nothing marked it. Nothing advertised it. Inside was different. 3 rooms, clean and well-maintained, lit by the kind of even light that costs someone real energy to maintain underground. The first room held equipment and gear. The second held a small command setup, 2 screens, a central table covered in overlapping documents and photographs. The third, behind a reinforced door that Aldrich opened with a handprint scanner, held the archive proper. Floor to ceiling, all 4 walls, shelving units loaded with physical files, each one color-coded and labeled in a shorthand I didn't recognize. And in the center of the room, a table. On the table, a single file already pulled and open. Aldrich had been here before I arrived at Crestholm Keep. He had already known what he was looking for. I moved to the table and looked at the file. The top sheet was a document I recognized by format, an archive cross-reference log. At the top, the designation number I had read from my mother's file. VC Register Crestholm Sub-Archive Designation 7 Cale. Below the header, a record that spanned 3 dense pages. I read, I had to read slowly because the language was archival, formal, compressed, full of notation conventions I had to interpret from context. But the content was not complicated. Cain, Aldrich's father, the previous Alpha King, had in the years before the Border Reformation conflict been secretly working with a woman named Moran. Not a political alliance, not a strategic cooperation. They had discovered independently and then together that they both carried aspects of the binding line. Not the full expression. No one in the living generation held the full genetic expression, but complementary aspects. And their research, conducted in secrecy over 3 years, had led them to a conclusion that the Vessel Council would have found catastrophic. The full binding didn't require the Council's intervention or control. It could occur naturally, voluntarily between two wolves who both carried elements of the line and who chose of their own will to activate it. It had happened before, centuries ago, before the Council had reorganized the archives to bury the evidence. And it had produced in that ancient generation exactly what the old theology described. A resonance that moved through the pack bonds of all 5 territories simultaneously, strengthening every connection, healing fractures, dissolving the kind of deep territorial mistrust that fueled wars. The Council's entire power structure rested on controlling that process, I said aloud, on being the gatekeepers of unity. If the binding could happen without them, they would be irrelevant. Worse than irrelevant, Aldrich said from beside me. Exposed. Because their entire justification for a century of archive manipulation was the claim that only they could safely manage the binding line. Remove that claim, and everything they did to every bloodline they suppressed becomes an unjustifiable crime. I finished. I turned the 3rd page and stopped. At the bottom of the document, in handwriting I recognized, precise, slanted slightly left, the handwriting of someone trained in both efficiency and care. My mother's hand. A single line added long after the rest of the document was written. Recently, I thought the ink was newer than the pages. If you are reading this, the time has come. The heir is ready. Find her. The binding cannot wait much longer. I looked up at Aldrich. He was already looking at me. She knew someone would come, I said. She knew you would come, he said. And the apple trees and the border house and every ordinary detail of my carefully constructed life rearranged itself one final time. Not a hiding place, a launching pad. My mother had built my whole life around this moment. The question I couldn't answer yet, the one that would keep me awake for the next 3 nights, was simple and enormous. What exactly was I supposed to do now? Chapter 5. The mark that wasn't there. I told Aldrich about the nights I had checked for the scar. We were back in the command room, seated on opposite sides of the central table, the documents still between us. Tavar had taken a position by the door, present, quiet, watchful. The kind of guard who listens to everything and reacts to nothing unless reacting is required. I told him about being 12 years old, standing in front of the cracked mirror in our border house bathroom, running my fingers along my jaw because I had found one of my mother's old healer diagrams that mentioned birthmarks with pack significance. I told him about being 17 and doing the same thing after a pack elder had made a casual remark about bloodline traits, and I had caught my mother's expression. That controlled, carefully neutral expression that I now understood was the face she made when something got too close. No scar, I said. Nothing. My skin on the left side is completely unmarked. Aldrich had been quiet through the telling. He pulled a folder from the shelf behind him, one he clearly knew by location, and laid it open on the table. Inside were medical documents, precise, detailed, written in the hand of someone with serious training. At the top of each page, a name, Moran Cain. My mother's healer records, he said. She maintained them herself. She didn't trust the official pack healers with anything sensitive. These are the ones she kept in her personal archive. He turned to a specific page and pushed it toward me. I read. It was a document about the Crest Mark itself, how it manifested, how it developed. And it contained something I hadn't known, something that reordered everything I'd been assuming. The Crest Mark in its earliest form was invisible. Not faint, not subtle. Invisible. Present in the blood, present in the cellular structure, but not yet surfaced on the skin. It required an activation event, a moment of sufficient biological stress or significance, usually tied to the first full expression of the wolf's deeper nature. In every documented historical case, the scar had appeared only when the carrier was ready, when they had developed enough internal strength to carry the full weight of what the bloodline meant. The mark comes when you are strong enough to bear what it brings, I said, reading from the document. That's how my mother described it, Aldrich said. She didn't get the scar until she was 21, late by historical standards. She'd had a difficult adolescence, severe pack trauma, early loss. The mark waited until she'd processed enough of it. I sat back. So, the absence of the scar didn't tell me I didn't carry the line. It just told me I hadn't activated it yet. I thought about my life on the border. Quiet, constrained. My mother keeping me small, keeping me safe, keeping me unnoticed. Had she been, without meaning to, also keeping me from the kind of stress or significance that would trigger the mark? Had the very protection she'd built around me been preventing me from becoming what I needed to become? The thought was uncomfortable and complex, and I set it aside for later. What happened to your father? I said instead. The record said he and your mother were working together. What happened to him when the council moved against her? Something moved through Aldrich's face, carefully managed, but present. He died 2 years after my mother disappeared, he said. Officially a territorial challenge. Another alpha pushed a border claim, my father responded. He was killed in the engagement. A pause. I was 18. I took the throne under the council's supervision. They appointed a regency of elders to guide me through the first 2 years ostensibly to help me. In practice, to keep me managed. And you played along, I said. I was patient, he said, and there was something in his voice that was not quite correction, but close. I was 18, and I had just lost both parents within 2 years, and I had exactly no proof that any of what I suspected was true. Playing along was the only move that kept me alive and positioned to eventually find the truth. I looked at him, really looked. Not at the Alpha King, not at the legend, but at the person who had spent 8 years quietly building a case against the people who had taken his parents, all while sitting on a throne and wearing the iron expression and giving nothing away. You've been alone in this, I said. Tavarn knows, he said, and 2 others in my inner circle. That's all. That's not much. It's enough, he said. Until now. The until now sat between us. I didn't respond to it directly. Instead, I looked at the document. My mother added to the line at the bottom. The heir is ready. Find her. How long ago was that written, do you think? He had clearly thought about this already. The ink is consistent with a period of about 8 months to a year, which aligns with when she started getting sick. Yes. So, she had come here. She had come to Crest home somehow in the first stages of her illness before the fading took enough of her mobility, and she had added that line to the document, a message, a signal. And then she had gone home and started dying. And she had sent me no message, no instruction, nothing. Because to send me something was to risk pointing the council in my direction. She had trusted me to find it myself. The weight of that, the specific aching weight of being trusted with something by someone who couldn't tell you they trusted you, pressed against the inside of my chest, and I breathed through it and kept my face arranged. I need to go back to Ashen, I said. I know, Aldrich said. She needs to know that we found the record, that we're moving. I think. I stopped. Thought about what the healer documents had said about the Vessel Council's suppression methods. I think knowing that might slow the fading, even if we can't reverse it yet. If the suppression is partly psychological, if it feeds on isolation, on being cut off from her bloodline. Knowing you're here might help, he finished. It might. He was quiet for a moment. Then I'll send Tavar with you and 2 others. People will notice a royal escort arriving in a border pack, I said. Not if they're dressed like private contractors, he said, which they are technically. Tavar's operational unit exists outside the public royal record. He paused. I also need you to do something before you leave. What? He stood and moved to one of the equipment shelves, brought back a small sealed case, set it on the table, and opened it. Inside, what looked like a pen, but wasn't. A medical instrument, a subdermal marker, the kind pack healers used for bloodline diagnostic work. I need a blood sample, he said. A real one, not the standard territorial registration type. Deep marker blood, the kind that can be run against the binding line genetic sequence. He paused. If you carry the full dormant line, not just your mother's partial expression, but the full sequence inherited from both her and your father. My father, I said. He looked at me steadily. I don't know who my father is, I said. My mother never told me. I asked twice. She said it wasn't relevant. Another silence. This one had a different quality. Careful, loaded. The full binding line, Aldrich said slowly, requires both sides of the complement. My mother and father both carried partial expressions. Their child. He stopped. I stared at him. Their child, I said carefully, would carry both. Yes. And that child would have the full dormant sequence. Yes. The fire in the small heating unit in the corner of the room was the only sound. You have the mark, I said. Your mother's Crest Mark. You've had it since you were 16. You said she transferred it before she was taken through some activation method. She prepared me, he said. She said she needed me to carry it, that I would understand why eventually. I pressed my fingers to my jaw, to the clean, unmarked skin. The heir is ready, I said. My mother's words. Find her. I need to know your bloodline before I say anything further. Aldrich said quietly. Because if the sequence comes back the way I think it might, then everything changes, I said. Everything changes, he agreed. I held out my arm. He took the sample with steady hands. And as the marker pressed against my skin, I watched his face, controlled iron, carefully blank, and saw underneath all of it something I would not have been able to name an hour ago. Fear. Not of me. For me. And I understood in that moment that whatever the blood test showed, whatever the sequence revealed, I was already part of something I could not walk away from. And I was not sure anymore that I wanted to. We are deep into the shadows of Crest Home now. If Freya's journey is keeping you on the edge of your seat, take a second to hit that like button and make sure you're subscribed. Your support helps bring these worlds to life. Now, let's get back to the road to Ashen. Chapter 6. Ashen in Winter. We left for Ashen the next morning before sunrise. Tavar drove. Two others, a quiet man named Dresh and a woman named Kayla, who moved like she was always ready to become something dangerous, followed in a second vehicle. Everyone in civilian clothing, nothing to suggest royal affiliation. Tavar had traded her tactical jacket for a weathered canvas coat and looked like exactly what they were claiming to be. A private contractor team hired for a routine escort job. I sat in the passenger seat and watched the mountain roads give way to the lower valley roads, and the valley roads give way to the eastern arterials, and the arterials eventually open into the flat, scrubby expanse of the Ashen lower territory. I had grown up thinking this landscape was just bleak. Now it looked deliberate. The kind of place you chose because no one looked twice at it. Because powerful people drove through it without stopping. The blood sample results would take 48 hours. Aldrich had said he would reach me through Tavar's comm when they were ready. Until then, go to my mother, assess her condition, try to make contact in a way that wouldn't look like anything more than a daughter returning home. I thought about what to say to her. I thought about it for 4 hours of driving through gray winter landscape. And by the time we reached the outer edge of the lower territory pack settlement, I still didn't know. There was no right way to say, I know who you are. I know what you've been carrying. I found your message. Not without watching her face do the thing it had been trained not to do, and not without potentially exposing both of us to whatever council monitoring might be in place. I would have to feel my way through it. The settlement looked the same as I'd left it 3 weeks ago. Low, practical buildings, with smoke in the cold air. The particular quality of stillness that comes over a small border pack in winter. People who know each other's movements so well that an unfamiliar vehicle arriving is immediately notable. I had Tavar parked 2 streets away from my mother's house. Give me an hour alone with her first, I said. Tavar looked like she wanted to object on security grounds and then decided against it. 1 hour, she said. Then Dresh and I come in as concerned contractors checking on a client. Fine. The walk to my mother's house took 4 minutes. I stood outside it for almost 2 of those minutes, looking at the wood-framed walls, the dormant garden, the 2 apple trees. Stripped bare by winter. The front window had light behind it, warm amber. She was awake. I knocked. The pause before she answered was longer than usual. Then the door opened. My mother looked smaller than when I'd left. That was the first thing, a physical, visceral thing that hit me in the stomach. She had always been slight, but contained, upright. Now she stood in the doorway wrapped in a heavy cardigan, and there was a looseness in her posture that hadn't been there before, like something structural was slowly releasing its tension. Her face when she saw me. Relief first, then immediately under the relief, alarm. "You're back," she said. "Hi, Mama," I said. She looked past me at the empty street, then back at me. Her eyes, still sharp, still completely present in this moment, moved over my face with the diagnostic precision she'd applied to patients my whole life. "You found something," she said. Not a question. I stepped inside. She closed the door behind us. The house was warm, the heating unit running, the small front room arranged as it always was. 2 armchairs by the window, a reading table, her medical reference books lined along the wall. The big one with the photograph tucked into the back was still on the table beside her armchair. I noticed she had moved it from the bedside. She'd known I'd seen it. She'd known since I left. We sat. She lowered herself into her chair with the careful deliberateness of someone managing discomfort they don't want witnessed. I sat across from her and took her hands. Cold. Too cold for a wolf, even in winter. Wolves ran warm. I felt the anger, the structural cold iron anger from 2 nights ago move through me again. Something had done this to her. Someone. "Tell me about Aldrich Cain," I said. She closed her eyes just for a moment. The expression that moved across her face was not the controlled neutral I was used to. It was grief. Old. Deep. The kind that's been compressed to fit inside a small container for a very long time. "You went to Crest home," she said. "Yes." "You saw the archives?" "Briefly before they caught me." I paused. I saw the cross-reference, and then I talked to the Alpha King. Her eyes opened, the sharp, alarmed look again. "Aldrich. He's not what the public face suggests," I said. "He's been building a case against the Vessel Council for 8 years. He found the sub-archive records. He has everything you and Moran documented." I tightened my hands around hers. "He found your edition, Mama." The last line. Her breath caught. "He knows," I said. "He knows you're part of the network. He knows what you carry, and he's ready to move. But he needs the bloodline confirmation." I looked at her steadily. "He took a blood sample from me. The results come back tomorrow." She looked at me for a long time. Outside, the wind moved through the bare apple trees with a sound like paper turning. "You don't have the mark," she said finally. "I know." He explained why it might not have appeared yet. Activation threshold. I paused. "But the blood doesn't lie, right? If the sequence is there, it's there." "Yes," she said. Quiet, certain. No hesitation. I let out a breath I hadn't known I was holding. "Mama, who is my father?" The question landed in the room like a stone. She looked away to the window, to the bare apple trees, to some middle distance that held something I couldn't see. "The answer to that question," she said carefully, "is going to change how you understand everything you've been told about the 5 territories, about the war, about what the Vessel Council was afraid of." She looked back at me. "Are you ready for that?" "I've been ready," I said. "I just didn't know it yet." She nodded slowly, and for the first time in my life, I watched my mother let go of a secret she had been carrying for 22 years. "Your father's name was Rael," she said. "Rael Cain." The room went very still. "Cain. He was Moran's brother," she continued. "Aldrich's uncle. He carried the complementary aspect of the binding line, the passive half, to Moran's active expression. When he and I—" She stopped, gathered herself. "When we were together, we understood what it meant, what a child between us would carry. Rael died 6 months before you were born. The council got to him first. My hands were perfectly steady in hers. I was not sure how. Rael Cain, Moran's brother, Aldrich's uncle. Which meant, Aldrich and I are—" I started. "Cousins," she said. "By blood." I sat with that, and then a second realization followed the first, cold and enormous. If I carried the full binding line, active from my mother, passive from my father, and Aldrich carried his mother's crest mark and his father's partial expression, we were not the same thing. We were not duplicates. We were the two halves of something the Vessel Council had spent a century making sure could never come together. They didn't suppress you to stop you from using the binding, I said. My voice sounded very calm. They suppressed you to stop you from helping me develop it. My mother's hands tightened around mine. You, she said, are the first wolf in 300 years who could activate the full binding alone. The heating unit ticked in the silence. Outside, the wind dropped, and I understood finally why my mother had built my whole life as a hiding place. Not to protect herself, to protect the world from what the wrong hands would do with me. Chapter 7. The Council moves. Tavar's comm lit up at exactly the 40-minute mark. Not her checking in on me. The other direction, Dresh from the vehicle 2 streets away. A single word on the encrypted line. Movement. I was still sitting with my mother, still processing the geological shift of the last hour when Tavar knocked on the front door. 3 sharp raps, the signal we'd agreed on. Not come, let me in. Come to the door. I was there in 4 seconds. 2 vehicles came through the settlement's north entry. Tavar said quietly, standing just outside the door, her eyes on the street. Unmarked. But the plates are Council Administrative Registry. I know the format. They parked at the Pack Alpha's hall, Phoenix Hall. Our Pack Alpha. Cold moved through me. They're asking questions, Tavar said, which means they don't know exactly where she is yet, but they will within the hour. I turned back to the room. My mother was already standing, which told me her hearing was still fully functional even if her body wasn't. How long? She asked Tavar over my shoulder. 40 minutes, possibly less if Phoenix cooperative. Tavar's tone wasn't accusatory, just factual. My mother made a small tired sound. Fennec has been cooperative with them for 11 years, she said. He doesn't know what he's cooperating with. He thinks they're standard border compliance officers. Can you move? I asked my mother. I can move, she said with a firmness that was pure muscle memory, the reflex of someone who has had to insist on their own functionality many times. But I watched her stand, and I saw the effort it cost her, and something in me pressed flat and hardened. Kayla's getting the vehicle, Tavar said. We go in 3 minutes. I moved through the house fast. Not panicked. Efficient. I had never packed for emergency departure before, but I had apparently been trained for it in the same quiet, incremental way I'd been trained for everything else. My mother's medical bag, the reference book with the photograph, 2 changes of warm clothing from her room, the small locked box from the top shelf of her closet that she had told me once when I was 9 contained things that were not for opening, but also not for leaving behind. I brought it all to the door. My mother put on her coat and her boots with the methodical care of someone rationing energy. The photograph, she said. I have it, I said. She looked at me, and for just a moment, through the illness and the urgency and the weight of 22 years of careful secrets, she was simply my mother, looking at me the way she'd looked at me across every dinner table, every garden afternoon, every childhood storm. I'm sorry, she said, for how much I couldn't tell you. Tell me after, I said, when we're out of this. We went. Kayla had the vehicle running. Dresh was already scanning the northern road with a sight tool. I pretended I hadn't noticed him carrying. Tavar took the rear position, watching the direction of Phoenix Hall as we moved toward the vehicle. We were in and moving in under 2 minutes. The road south away from the settlement toward the Ashen arterial was clear. The winter light was thin and pale, the scrubby landscape flat on all sides. Nothing to break visibility. Tavar tracked behind us on the encrypted comm, no pursuit. Not yet. We can't go back to Crestelm on the main roads, Tavar said from the driver's seat. If the council has administrative vehicles in the territory, they have checkpoints mapped. The Eastern Pass, my mother said. Tavar glanced in the mirror. The Grey Vale border pass? There's an unmapped route, my mother said. Through the dead zone. I know it. Silence in the vehicle. The dead zone was the unmapped territory east of Ashen. Officially impassable, practically avoided by everyone. Theoretically haunted by the kind of wolf mythology that sensible adults dismissed, but privately gave a wide berth. Nobody traveled through it. How do you know an unmapped route through the dead zone? Kayla asked from the back seat. Because I mapped it, my mother said simply. 17 years ago for exactly this purpose. Of course she had. We drove for 3 hours before stopping. A brief stop in a lobby off the arterial to use the comm gear in Tavar's bag for a secure contact to Crest home. Aldrich answered on the second signal. Tavar gave him a compact situation report. Council vehicles in Ashen Lower Territory, origin point unknown, our departure, current route plan, estimated arrival via the Grey Veil Pass in approximately 6 hours, depending on conditions. Aldrich's voice was contained and rapid. Blood results came back, he said. A pause. Freya, he said. Put her on. I took the comm from Tavar. I'm here. The sequence is a full expression, he said. Both complement aspects fully inherited, fully integrated, dormant, but structurally complete. Another pause. Briefer, tighter. You're what we thought. I looked at my mother who was watching me from the adjacent seat with those sharp, exhausted eyes. I know. I said into the comm, she told me about my father. The pause this time was longer. When Aldrich spoke again, his voice had changed. Not broken, but altered. The way iron sounds different when it's been heated. Still hard, but with movement inside it. Rael, he said. Yes. A breath. I didn't know he had a child. Neither did I said. Get to Crestham, he said. I'm beginning the final case assembly. We need you here before the council works out where you're going. He paused. And Freya, the mark. What about it? Your full sequence activation, he said. It may trigger now. The biological stress threshold. I know, I said. I read the documents. Be ready for it, he said. It's not. He stopped, chose his words. It's not comfortable, from my mother's records. I'll manage, I said. I know you will, he said. And there was something in those 4 words that landed differently than anything he'd said to me before. Not alpha to subject, not strategist to asset. Something quieter, more personal. I handed the comm back to Tavar and looked out at the pale winter road. He's going to challenge the council publicly, my mother said. She had heard, of course. Wolf hearing didn't fade with the body. Yes, I said. He'll need more than the blood results and the archive records, she said. The council will contest everything. They have elders on every major pack council in the 5 territories. They'll call it fabrication. He knows, I said. He needs a demonstration, she said. Proof that the binding is real. Proof that it can activate without their management. I turned to look at her. He needs you to do it, she said. Publicly, in front of every pack council in the 5 territories. I thought about the theology, the full binding, a resonance moving through the pack bonds simultaneously, strengthening every connection, making the council's role unnecessary, and their history of manipulation catastrophically visible. I don't know how, I said. You will, she said. When the mark comes, you'll know. The vehicle hit a rough patch of road, and she closed her eyes against the jolt, and I watched her jaw tighten with the effort of not showing pain, and I thought about the people who had done this to her. Quietly, methodically, from a distance. And I let the cold iron anger settle fully into the structure of who I was. I was not just someone's hidden secret anymore. I was not the invisible girl from the border scrub. I was something that had been waiting in the dark for a very long time, and I was almost ready. We hit the dead zone road as the sun dropped below the mountain line. My mother navigated from memory, her voice steady, directing Tavar through turns that weren't on any map. And sometime in the second hour of that dark, unmarked road, with the pine trees pressing close and the stars sharp above the gap in the canopy, I felt it. A pull along the left side of my jaw. A heat like a scar being born. Chapter 8. The mark arrives. I didn't say anything. Not at first. The heat along my jaw was subtle enough at the start that I told myself it was the cold outside coming through the vehicle's seal or tension or the particular way anxiety manifests in the body. I pressed my fingers to the skin and felt nothing different under them, but the heat remained. And over the first hour of the dead zone road, it deepened. Not painful. Not yet. More like the feeling in a limb that's been asleep for a long time and is beginning to wake. That prickling, pressured sensation of blood returning to places that have been closed. My mother was navigating with her eyes closed now between directions, conserving energy. Tavar drove with the focused efficiency of someone who trusted their headlights and their reflexes. Dresh and Kayla were quiet in the back. I sat with my hand against my jaw and breathed through it. Count to 4 going in. Count to 4 going out. By the 90-minute mark, the heat had spread. No longer just the jaw. It traced a path downward, following exactly the route I had looked for and not found dozens of times in a childhood mirror. Jaw below the ear, down the neck, toward the collarbone. I turned my face toward the window so no one would see my expression. Freya, my mother said without opening her eyes. I'm fine, I said. I know, she said. But let it come. Don't push against it. Tavar's eyes flicked to me in the mirror. Said nothing. Kept driving. Don't push against it. My whole life had been a version of pushing against it. Staying small, staying quiet, staying off every map that mattered. I had not done it consciously, but I had done it thoroughly because I had been raised inside the architecture of that protection without knowing the protection was there. Now I let my hands fall to my lap. I turned my face forward. I looked at the dark tree-lined road unspooling through the headlights, and I stopped pressing. The heat moved through me like a slow wave. It was not comfortable. Aldrich's warning had been accurate. It felt like something deep in the tissue of my face and neck was rearranging itself at a cellular level, which was, I suppose, exactly what was happening. The pressure built to something genuinely sharp for about 3 minutes, and I kept my breathing even and my face arranged. And then, like a door opening from the inside, it released, and I felt different. I can't explain it precisely. It wasn't that I suddenly felt powerful or transformed or mythologically significant. It was subtler and stranger than that. It was more like a frequency I had never been able to hear before had suddenly come into range. A low, constant hum below the threshold of normal sensation. The packed bonds of every wolf in the 5 territories present like a background radiation I had never had the tuning to detect. I could feel them, not individually, not with any detail, just the fact of them. The vast, branching, interconnected web of it, alive, dynamic, in some places thrumming with health and strength, and in other places thin and frayed, worn down by distance or trauma, or the methodical damage of a century of vessel council interference. It was the most extraordinary thing I had ever experienced. It was also heartbreaking, because the damage was everywhere. Not catastrophic, not broken, but the bonds were weakened in ways that shouldn't have been possible without deliberate sustained interference. Like someone had spent 100 years introducing a slow, almost undetectable tension into every thread of the web, and the threads had adjusted, had compensated, had continued to function, but were permanently less than they should have been. This was what the Vessel Council had done. Not just suppress bloodlines, not just falsify archives. It's come, my mother said quietly, still with her eyes closed. She knew. She could feel it. Maybe through her own attenuated connection, through the shared blood. Yes, I said. What do you feel? Everything, I said. The bonds. All of them. I can feel where they're damaged. A very small sound from my mother. Something between a sob and a word. Not quite either. She reached across the space between us and put her hand over mine, and I turned my palm up and held her cold fingers. That's what Moran described, she said. In her research notes, she said the first activation was like hearing music you'd been told your whole life was impossible, and then realizing that the impossibility was the lie, not the music. I pressed her hand and didn't speak. We drove. The Dead Zone road was genuinely eerie in the dark, not because of wolf mythology, but because of the absence of any human or pack presence. No settlements, no border markers, no light anywhere except our headlights and the stars. The pine trees were enormous here, older growth that had been left completely alone for decades, their branches interlocking overhead like cathedral arches. Left fork, my mother said. In about 400 meters, there will be a rock cairn on the right. Tavar found it and took the fork. 20 minutes later, the road began to climb. The trees thinned. The mountains of the Grey Vale border came into view. Massive, close, their snow-covered upper reaches silver under the stars. Tavar's comm activated. Dresh's voice. Clean rear. No following presence. Good. Whatever lead we had from Ashen, we had held it. 2 hours to the Grey Vale Pass marker, Tavar said. Another 3 to crest home from there, depending on surface. 5 hours. I settled back and watched the mountains and felt the vast damaged network of the 5 territories humming in my blood. Tavar said quietly from the driver's seat, "For what it's worth, I've been with the king since I was 22. 8 years of watching him sit in a throne room, carrying a weight he couldn't show to anyone." She paused. "He doesn't trust people. Not in any complete way. You're the first person since his father died that he's briefed fully." I wasn't sure what to do with that information. I filed it. "Why are you telling me?" I said. "Because you should understand what it cost him," she said. "The trust. It cost him something real. I wanted you to know that." I looked at the dark road. "Noted," I said. We reached the Gray Vale Pass marker just before midnight. A stone pillar, unmarked, set at the highest point of the pass road. Tavar stopped the vehicle and stepped out for a 2-minute perimeter check. The air at this altitude was brutally cold, the stars enormous and indifferent. My mother, when I helped her out of the vehicle to stretch, stood and looked up at them and breathed. "I feel better," she said with the careful accuracy of a healer making an observation she wants to get exactly right. I looked at her. The quality of her face in the starlight was different. Not dramatically, not transformed. But the looseness in her posture was fractionally less. The temperature of her hands when I took them slightly less cold. "It's you," she said. "The activation. You being fully present in the bloodline. It changes the field around you. Even the proximity helps. Like a signal getting stronger. A connection partially restored just by being near the source." "What would the full binding do?" I asked. She looked out over the mountains. In the old accounts, it was described as a restoration event. Every bond in every pack simultaneously strengthened and clarified. Every wolf in the 5 territories feeling just for a moment the full depth of what their bonds were meant to be. She paused. "And any interference, any artificial weakening, any council-imposed severance, exposed and dissolved." "Dissolved," I said. "The suppression they put on me," she said. "It would end." I stood with that for a moment. The cold wind moved over the pass and made the single stone pillar creak faintly in its setting. "When we get to Crestholm," I said, "when Aldrich presents the case, I'm going to have to do it publicly." "Yes," she said. "In front of the council representatives." "Yes. They'll try to stop it," I said. "They'll try everything," she said. And there was no fear in her voice. Just the quiet certainty of someone who has spent 22 years preparing for a moment and is now finally watching it arrive. I helped her back into the vehicle. The comm activated. Aldrich's voice crackling slightly through the altitude. "What's your position?" "Gray Vale Pass marker," Tavar said. "Clean. 3 hours out." A pause. "Freya," Aldrich said. "Here," I said. "The council has filed an emergency motion with the Interterritory Elder Assembly," he said. "They're requesting an emergency session. They know we have the archive records. They're trying to convene a tribunal before we can present." "How long?" I said. 18 hours, he said. "They have the votes to call the session. It convenes tomorrow evening." 18 hours. "That's enough time," I said. "Barely," he said. "It's enough," I said. And I was suddenly and completely certain. The vehicle started again. The pass descended toward the Crest home valley, and somewhere below, in the black iron rooms of the keep, the Alpha King was laying out 8 years of careful work on a table, and I was 3 hours away with a scar that hadn't existed this morning, and a bloodline that was 300 years overdue. The council had 18 hours. We had something more durable than time. We had the truth. Chapter 9. The Session. We arrived in Crest home 2 hours and 40 minutes later. Aldrich was waiting in the lower courtyard of the keep when we came through the gate. No ceremony, no retinue, just him in his dark jacket, hands clasped behind his back, standing in the lit arch of the entrance like he'd been standing there for hours. Tavar pulled the vehicle to a stop and cut the engine, and I was out before she was moving toward him because there wasn't time for slow. He took me in with a single comprehensive look, the way soldiers do when they need to assess status fast. His gaze moved to my jaw, to the left side of my neck, and something in his expression changed. The iron held, but what was underneath it shifted. All that careful, compressed something coming fractionally closer to the surface. "It came," he said, "an hour into the dead zone road." I said. A nod, then passed me at the vehicle. Tavar was helping my mother out, steadying her with one careful arm. Aldrich moved past me, not running, but with the kind of urgency that doesn't need running, and was there before I was. He stopped in front of my mother. I don't know what I expected from that moment. The Alpha King meeting the woman who had been his mother's closest confidant, who had carried his bloodline's secrets for 22 years, who was dying by the hand of his enemies. What happened was Aldrich Cain, Alpha King of 5 territories, placed one hand carefully over my mother's and bent his head. Not a bow. Something older than a bow. Something that the word reverence comes close to but doesn't quite capture. My mother put her other hand over his. "You look like her," she said quietly. "Around the eyes." "I know," he said. "I've been told." They stood like that for 3 seconds. Then he straightened and was back to operational. "I've prepared rooms for you and your mother in the East Wing. A healer is standing by, one I trust, not council-affiliated. Your mother rests before the session. You and I work." We worked. The next 14 hours were the most intense of my life, and I have spent time in emergency situations before. Border crossings gone wrong, pact disputes, the kind of minor crises that small border pacts absorb routinely. This was nothing like that. This was building a case complex enough to hold up against the combined institutional weight of the Vessel Council and their allies on the Interterritory Elder Assembly in a session that the Council had designed to go badly for us. Aldrich's command room at the Keep was larger and better equipped than the sub-archive version. A long table, screens on 2 walls, 3 advisors I was now meeting for the first time. A compact, incisive woman named Pell, who handled legal structures. A silver-haired elder named Dove, who had been quietly operating against the Council from inside the Elder Assembly for 4 years. And a young analyst named Rek, who could cross-reference archive records at a speed that made my strong memory feel leisurely. We laid out everything. The original binding line research, Moran and Kale's documentation, the Vessel Council's register with its cross-references to suppressed bloodlines, the medical records showing the suppression method applied to my mother, the blood sequence results, my activation documented in the healer's report from the examination Aldrich had arranged when we arrived. And woven through all of it, the single damning through line. The Council had not been managing the binding line for the good of the 5 territories. They had been suppressing it to maintain control. Every falsified archive entry, every relocated family, every unexplained death and disappearance. All of it in service of keeping the binding from occurring naturally, freely, without their management. "They'll call it fabricated," Pell said for the 3rd time. She said it not as defeat, but as a problem to solve. "The blood sequence can't be fabricated," Rex said. "Not with the testing method we used. It's a 3-factor verification. Even if they contest the archive records, they can't contest the biological data. They'll contest the methodology," Pell said. "Then we demonstrate," Aldrich said. He looked at me across the table. The room went quiet. "Tell me what you need," I said. "The session is in the main assembly hall. 47 representatives," he said. "Pack alphas, elder assembly members, the Council's own delegates. If you activate the full binding during the session, every wolf in that room feels it. Every wolf in the 5 territories feels it," I said simultaneously. "The bonds will strengthen and the interference will dissolve real-time in the body. Undeniable." He paused. "The Council can contest documents. They cannot contest what 47 alpha-level wolves feel in their own blood simultaneously. And after," Pell said quietly, "when the Council's suppression of your mother dissolves, when she recovers in front of witnesses, it's over." "It's over," Dove said. I thought about the hum I had felt in the dead zone road, the vast damaged web, the threads that needed restoring. "I don't know how to direct it," I said. "I can feel the bonds, but controlling the activation. I don't have training." "According to every historical account," Aldrich said, "it doesn't require direction. The bloodline carries the instruction. You have to get to a sufficient state of—" He paused. "Emotional openness," my mother said from the doorway. Everyone looked at her. She was standing with her hand against the doorframe, the healer somewhere behind her, but present and alert, eyes sharp, voice steady. The historical accounts all describe it the same way, she said, walking carefully to the table. The binding doesn't activate through will. It activates through the absence of guarding. When the carrier stops protecting themselves from the full weight of what they feel. She looked at me. You've been guarded your whole life, Freya. Carefully, necessarily. But tomorrow you're going to have to put it down. I thought about the weight I'd been carrying. The invisible girl, the unwanted one, the one who'd grown up in a hiding place disguised as an ordinary life, who had learned to take up as little space as possible, who had pressed her hands flat against her thighs and breathed through every unsteady moment. All right, I said. My mother sat beside me, put her hand over mine the way she had in the vehicle at the pass. I'll be there, she said. When you put it down, I'll be right there. I pressed her hand and didn't let the emotion surface all the way. One more night, I told myself. One more night of guarding. Then we let go. The session convened at 7 in the evening. The assembly hall of Crest Home Keep was not as large as the throne room, but it was more serious, built for deliberation rather than ceremony. A circular arrangement of seats tiered with a central floor space for presenters. The ceiling was domed, the acoustics perfect. Every word spoken at the center could be heard at the outermost tier. 47 representatives. Every major pack in the 5 territories. The council's 4 delegates sat together in the 3rd tier, 3 older men and 1 woman, all in the formal gray of the elder assembly. Their faces were professionally neutral. They had done this before. They were very good at institutional weight. Aldrich presented the case. He was extraordinary at it. I watched from my seat in the 2nd tier, beside my mother, Tavar on my other side, and understood for the first time fully what 8 years of patient preparation looked like when it was finally deployed. He was precise, methodical, devastating. Every document sequenced correctly, every cross-reference explained, every suppression case laid out with the clinical detail of a healer documenting a wound. The council delegates interrupted twice. Pell, seated in the legal advisor position, handled both interruptions cleanly. And then Aldrich stopped presenting. He looked at me. I have one final piece of evidence, he said to the room. It cannot be documented or submitted as a file. It will have to be witnessed directly. Silence. Freya, he said, daughter of Devorn, biological heir of Rael Cain of the Cain bloodline, full carrier of the binding line. Please come to the center floor. I stood. I walked down the tiered steps to the center floor, and the 47 representatives watched me, and the council delegates watched me, and Aldrich watched me from the presenter's position. I stopped at the center, and I looked at my mother up in the 2nd tier wrapped in her heavy cardigan, her hands folded, her eyes on mine. The expression on her face was the one I had never been able to name, the one that had always looked like grief. I understood it now. It wasn't grief. It was love that had been compressed for 22 years into the shape of grief, because that was the only way to keep it hidden. I put down the guard. Not slowly, not carefully. All at once. The way you have to take off a bandage. Quick and complete. Everything I had been pressing flat. The loneliness, the invisibility, the hunger to be known, the years of reaching for my mother's full truth and being gently turned away. The love I had for her that had no adequate container. The loss of a father I had never known. The anger at what had been done to her. The strange, new, terrifying connection to something ancient and enormous running through my blood. All of it simultaneously. Unguarded. The heat along my jaw flared. And then I felt it move. Not from me, outward. More like through me, like I was a door that had just been opened. And what passed through wasn't mine, but belonged to something much larger. The full binding. The resonance. 300 years dormant. It moved through the room first. I watched it happen on the faces of every wolf present. That sudden startled expression of people feeling something in their own bodies that they hadn't expected. Not pain. Depth. The pack bonds. Their own bonds to their own people suddenly present at their full amplitude like a radio signal clarifying. All the static gone. Just the clean, pure frequency underneath. Several people made sounds. One elder pressed her hand to her chest. One of the younger alpha representatives gripped the edge of his seat. And then it moved outward beyond the walls of Crest Keep. Through the valley, through the mountains, through the territories. Ashen, Nordville, Grey Vale, Duskmar. Through every pack, every bond, every wolf in 5 territories simultaneously. The council delegate in the gray formal coat stood up. "This is a fabrication," he said, and his voice cracked on the last syllable because his pack bond had just clarified. He could feel it. He couldn't lie about it. Not to a room full of wolves who were all feeling the same thing. And my mother in the second tier straightened. Just slightly, just incrementally. The looseness in her posture tightening back to something that had been there before she was suppressed. The suppression dissolving. 32 of the 47 representatives were on their feet. The council delegate sat back down. He had nothing left to say because the evidence was not on paper anymore. It was in the blood of every wolf in the 5 territories. And you cannot contest what lives in the body. Chapter 10. After the storm. The Vessel Council was formally dissolved 11 days later. It did not go cleanly. Nothing like this ever does. There were legal challenges, emergency injunctions, an attempt by 2 of the Council's elder assembly allies to file a counter case claiming the binding activation had been manufactured through a previously unknown pharmaceutical compound. Pell handled that one so thoroughly that the 2 elders subsequently resigned from the assembly without being asked. There were 3 packs in Nordville whose alpha representatives had deep enough council ties that they initially refused to accept the session findings. Aldrich sent delegations, not enforcement delegations, and within a week, 2 of those packs had changed their positions. The third took another 3 days, and a direct conversation between their alpha and Aldrich that I was not present for, but which Tavar later described to me as, in her words, the Alpha King being very clear and very patient for 45 minutes until the man realized he had no ground left. The charges against me, the trespass and archive breach, were formally dropped on day 2, which I had known would happen, but which still felt like setting down a weight I'd forgotten I was carrying. My mother recovered. Not instantly. There was no dramatic reversal, no morning where she woke up restored to her full previous strength. But the fading stopped. The day after the session, when I went to her room in the East Wing, the looseness in her posture was markedly less. The temperature of her hands was normal. Her eyes, always sharp, were present in a way they hadn't fully been for 2 years. No gaps, no drift. Within a week, she was walking the courtyard without help. Within 10 days, she was arguing with the Keep's head healer about treatment methodology, which the head healer bore with surprising grace, and which I took as the best possible sign. She told me everything during those 11 days, in pieces over long evenings in front of the East Wing fireplace, with tea and the occasional apple from a supply someone had thoughtfully stocked, tart and small, not unlike our trees at home. She told me about meeting Moran Cain when they were both 19 at a small research gathering that Moran had organized under the cover of a pack healer conference. She told me about the years of quiet work, the network, the research, the slow, careful accumulation of truth. She told me about Rael. This part she told me once carefully, and I listened without interrupting. Rael Cain had been gentle in the way that some very strong things are gentle by choice. From security, not from weakness. He had been a researcher before he was anything else. More interested in the old theology than the politics of his bloodline. He and my mother had been drawn together, she said, not dramatically, but inevitably, the way things that belong together eventually find their arrangement. They had known what a child between them would mean for the binding line. They had decided anyway. He would have loved you, my mother said, and did not elaborate because she didn't need to. I thought about a man I would never meet and let myself grieve him quietly in the privacy of my own chest. In the way you grieve things that were taken before you could know what you were losing. Aldrich and I talked a lot in those 11 days, and differently than we had talked before. Less operational, more honest. The urgency was gone, and what was underneath it turned out to be 2 people who had been separately alone in a very specific way for a very long time, and who now shared something that no one else alive shared. The full weight of what the last week had cost and meant. He told me about growing up with the Crest Mark, the thing his mother had transferred to him before she was taken through a method that the theology called a guardian transfer. A way of passing the mark to protect it, not to activate it. He had carried it for 18 years without knowing its full significance, which was, he said, with the ghost of that almost smile, extremely typical of his mother's communication style. She was subtle, my mother said when I relayed this. She was the most subtle person I've ever met, and she considered it a virtue. Is it? I said. In the right circumstances, my mother said. In the wrong ones, it cost you 18 years of your son not fully understanding what he's carrying. I told Aldrich this. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, she also saved everything by doing it. If the council had known I understood, if I hadn't been able to maintain genuine operational ignorance as a young king. He paused. She made the right call. You believe that? I said. I've had 8 years to get there, he said. But yes. There was a morning, the 9th day, when I went to the archive room and stood in front of the wall of files and thought about what came next. The council's dissolution left a real gap, not a dangerous one. The 5 territories were not dependent on the council for actual governance, which the council had worked hard to ensure people believed while making sure the opposite was true. The territories had their own pack structures, their own alphas, their own systems. What the council had provided was a kind of overarching coordination mechanism that had in practice been a control mechanism. Replacing it was going to require a different model, one that worked with the pack structures rather than above them, one that was transparent about the binding line, about what it was, what it could do, what it meant for interterritorial connection rather than keeping it as a leverage point held by a few. Aldrich was already thinking about this. I was not surprised. I want you involved, he said on the 10th day in the command room over a large spread of territorial maps. Involved how? I said. Not cautious. Curious. You can feel the bonds, he said. Even at a distance, you told me. The full activation opened the sensitivity permanently. Yes. Then you can do something no one else currently alive can do, he said. You can monitor the health of the interterritorial bonds directly. Identify damage before it becomes crisis. Work with pack healers and alphas on the ground to address the fractures the council left behind. He paused. It will take years. The damage is extensive. I know, I said. I had been feeling the extent of it for 11 days. But it's reparable. Most of it. Most, he agreed. The packs in Duskmar are the worst affected. The council suppressed 3 bloodlines there in the last 40 years. The bonds in that territory have an old wound quality. Healed over wrong. He made a note. He was always making notes. You've been doing the assessment already, he said. I couldn't help it, I said. Once you can feel it, you can't not. He looked at me across the maps. I know that feeling, he said. The weight of something you can't put down. I don't want to put it down, I said. And that was true. Unexpectedly, fully true. The invisible girl from the border scrub who had grown up with a carefully constructed ordinariness that was actually a launching pad. She had launched. And what she had arrived at was not just a destiny or a bloodline obligation. It was a purpose, something that fit exactly the specific shape of who she was. I looked at the territorial maps and felt the vast network of bonds humming in my blood, and I thought, yes, this is what all of it was for. On the 11th day, my mother and I walked in the Crest home courtyard together, a long, slow loop in the weak winter sun, her arm through mine, our breath making small clouds in the cold air. She was almost herself, not the before version, the fully burdened, carefully contained woman who had built a life around a secret, but the after version. A woman who had put down what she'd been carrying and was discovering what it felt like to stand fully upright. What will you do? I asked her. Teach, she said without hesitation. There are pack healers across 5 territories who've been working with incomplete information their whole careers. The binding line has medical applications that the council suppressed, treatments, bond healing techniques. She paused. And I want to teach you properly the things I couldn't tell you before. I squeezed her arm. I'd like that. She looked at me with the expression I could name now. Full, uncompressed. I'm proud of you, she said. I've always been proud of you. I couldn't always show it safely, but I know, I said. Do you? I do now, I said. She nodded, and we walked another loop around the courtyard in the winter sun, the mountains close on all sides, the gray run river visible far below in the valley, and the packed bonds of the 5 territories humming at their new true amplitude all around us. Not perfect, still healing, still carrying the marks of what had been done to them, but alive, present, moving in the right direction. Later that afternoon, Aldrich found me at the window of the archive room, looking out at the valley, letting the hum of the bonds settle into something restful. He stood beside me, the same window we had stood at on that first night when everything was still unknown and the weight of the words, when he'd said his mother was, had pressed against the air between us. Different now. You're staying, he said. Not a question. For a while, I said. Duskmar first, then wherever the fractures are worst, and then. I looked at him, the iron gray eyes, the scar along his jaw, the mark I now carried the mirror of on the same path on my own face. 2 halves of something that had been kept apart for a century. Then wherever the work takes me, I said, I imagine our paths will cross regularly. Something in his face, the ghost of the smile, and this time it stayed. I imagine they will, he said. Outside the Crest home valley stretched under the winter sky, silver gray and enormous. The mountains at every edge, solid and permanent. Below in the courtyard, my mother was talking to the head healer. I could see them through the glass, animated, both gesturing at a notebook. The world felt, for the first time in my life, exactly as large as it was. Not threatening, not a hiding place, just true, just real, just mine to move through fully without guarding. I pressed my fingers to the scar on my jaw. Present, permanent, warm under my touch. A mark that had waited 22 years to arrive. Right on time. The 5 territories didn't change overnight. The healing took years, as healing always does. But it started that winter in a courtyard in Crestelm with a woman who had finally stopped hiding and a king who had finally stopped carrying it alone. And the bonds that connected every wolf in the 5 territories hummed on, stronger now, clearer now, carrying in their frequency the quiet, undeniable signature of something that could not be suppressed. The truth finding its way home. The truth always finds its way home. If this story moved you, if you felt Freya's journey in your chest, drop a comment and tell me which chapter hit you hardest. Make sure to subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss an adventure.